So we talked about extremism on the show. On this special online segment, we're going to talk about the perception of some of our religions in today's day. We have resident blogger and scholar John Stackhouse with us out in Moncton, New Brunswick. Nice to see you, John.
Good to see you, Molly.
He's joining our conversation. Of course, we had Rabbi Jordan Cohen from Anshe Sholom Temple. We have Raheel Raza, President for Muslims Facing Tomorrow, and our Sheldon Neil, pastor hat back on with us for this discussion. John, I want to start with you. Let's talk about the word evangelical. It has a lot of interesting undertones in today's day and age. Is it a good word or a bad word?
Well, I can understand why people see it's a bad word. Evangelicals in Canadian history have always been change agents. Evangelicals came into Canadian history in the 18th century, and they tried to help people change from a kind of automatic or listless kind of Christianity to a serious, warm-hearted, activist kind of Christianity. In the 19th century, evangelicals erected schools and hospitals and universities and public policy. And right into the 20th century, evangelicals are busy people. And evangelicals don't keep to themselves, which is not true of other forms of religion. So if you welcome what evangelicals have to offer, you're glad to see them coming. If you don't, then you're not.
Do you think, John, that what's happening in the U.S., the way that oftentimes evangelical is tied to politics, can give a different skew on that as well?
Well, my whole career, I've been trying to help Canadians see that what's happening south of the border among evangelicals is not, in fact, something we need to worry about up here. And every 5 years, some journalist gets worried that this horrible religious right is going to sweep into Canada. And from my earliest writing to the present, I'm saying that's not the case. The soil is different here. The climate's literally different here, as well as metaphorically. And while there are some people who sound a bit Trumpian, that's just not an issue for us. It's a very different situation in the States. The evangelicals in the States support Trump often because they feel they've lost status. They used to run the country. They want to make America great again. Evangelicals in Canada also used to run most of Anglo-Canada, but there's a sense in which evangelicals here have been much more willing to share space with their neighbors. And we're not all these right-wing nuts who insist on evangelicals running everything. That's just not who Canadian evangelicals are.
Yeah, it's a very interesting perspective. Rabbi, let's talk about perception in the Jewish tradition. What is misunderstood?
Oy, I think everything's misunderstood. We have a very, very long history, but we're a very small people. There's about 13.5 million Jews in the world, which is like nothing. People, I'm always shocked and surprised by the range. I mean, some people think they're just Jews like in biblical times and we don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Or on the opposite extreme that we all wear, black hats and caftans and have long beards and side curls. And it's just, the farthest thing from the truth. And then you throw in modern times the state of Israel, which is, it's the Jewish state, but it's a Western democratic state with all of the flaws of any other Western democracy, and it's not a theocracy. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't necessarily run as Judaism. And so people see one group, or they see what's going on in Israel, as a disproportionate amount of attention paid to us, and it's not always a true or an authentic picture of what it means to be a Jew in the 21st century.
Raheel, what are the unfair characterizations that you see and you worry about as a Muslim woman?
Oh, we could have this conversation for a very long time.
We could.
I think primarily the difference between Islam as a faith and Islamism as a political ideology. And in the work that I do, that's very important because, I am a Muslim and I have a spiritual connection to the faith. But those who have politicized the faith are the ones who are destroying our faith, we believe, because the politics overtakes the faith aspect of it. The other misconception there is that we are all the same. That Muslims are a monolith. We are not. Muslims are very, very diverse.
Yeah.
I mean, right here in Canada, you have Muslims from almost 60 different parts of the world. They have the freedom to practice the faith any way they want. And that's the only commonality. Our food, our nationalities, our dress, our language are all different. But what connects us is that one common thread. But in terms, you were mentioning extremism. I think the conversation that is very important right now is the difference between nonviolent extremism and violent extremism. You know, violent extremism is ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, the violent extremists, and we know they're out there. But how dangerous is nonviolent extremism? You know, does nonviolent extremism, an ideology that is bordering towards extremism, does it lead to violent extremism? And unfortunately, we are not having these major discussions, but we need to. You know, this is a very pounding question that needs to be addressed, and we have to have these discussions both within our faith communities and with other faith communities to see how they have dealt. I mean, I believe there is fundamentalism in every faith, and if there were Muslim fundamentalists, I would have no problem. You can practice your faith any way you want. It's when it becomes politicized and leads to violence is when it
pours over and affects the rest of society. Let me ask you, Sheldon, because all of these perceptions matter, because the next generation, people our age and younger, are going to decide if they want to be affiliated with any of these religions or not. And the data is telling us that a growing majority of them are saying, I don't want to be affiliated at all.
That's right. And I think a lot of that is people are wrestling with, how does this quote unquote ancient book apply to my modern day context, what I'm experiencing? And that could be the treatment of women, which we've talked about, families, different people groups. How do I transfer that? And I think it's twofold. I think it's the jobs of those who are in leadership, people like myself, pastors, to really unpack these truths, not just in its historical context, but say, now, here is how it applies to your daily living today. If you don't create those bridges of understanding, people feel isolated. They think that's your truth. They don't seem to understand. Well, that was that. I don't understand how this works for me. And also a big debate is that I don't think there are enough. If we look at media, for example, we see a lot of people championing, I'm a Christian, and then they tie that word to an actual individual belief they may have. We've seen that south of the border. And then because people don't do enough reading of text, they say, well, I see this person saying this is Christian belief, and they jump and associate that to a book. Lastly, I'll say, you know, I always find it difficult when we say, how do we express things like religion and how it applies? When we look at the teachings of Jesus, he was never pushing a religious experience or a systematic experience. It was always come into something that is relational. So I always think the argument of Christian and religion is not even what Jesus' heart was. He said, you know, come into a relationship with me and let's walk this out. Don't come into a system, because especially our generation, they're saying we want an individual walk daily, not a system of thou shalt nots. So I think it's our job to really create an avenue where we teach relationship, daily walk, and not just blanket thou shalt nots.
I'm going to have every single one of you back here, because I had so many questions in my mind. John,
just jump in for one quick second based on what Sheldon said. You know, this idea of organized religion or forced religion. Hundreds of young people in Saudi Arabia and in Iran, who, you know, which are theocracies, are leaving the faith because they see no other choice. They have been told by the religious clergy that it's this way and no other way. You know, they don't have the choices to practice the faith the way they want. So the only choice they have is that they're leaving. Because that organized religion, that oppressive religiosity, which is really not about faith, but is about power and patriarchy and politics, is not something that appeals to them. So this is a whole new phenomena that is happening where they are leaving the faith. And it's very dangerous for them, because in these countries, to leave the faith means certain death.
Yeah, risking your life for sure. John, I'll come to you for the last word. You work with students, you teach students. Do you have hope as you're talking about religion, as you're writing about religion, that people actually want to be a part of something?
Oh, I think we do. I think we see the intensity of people joining various other causes today on behalf of the environment, on behalf of the proper treatment of animals, concern for children, concern for the poor. I think it's a basic human desire to connect with others. And I think what Sheldon says is true as far as it goes, that we want an individual, personal walk with God. But we also want to join with like-minded others who are on a healthy path that is producing shalom, that is producing well-being in the world. And for that, I think all of us want to encourage each other to walk on paths that lead to the flourishing of our world and not to its destruction.
Panel, great to have you with us. We'll do this again.
Yes, let's do it.
Awesome.
Thank you all for coming in.